G'day and thanks for joining us for another Australia Talks. I'm DK and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host Ardeet. Today is Wednesday, the 22nd of April 2026, and our topics this week are Australia and Japan have agreed on new warship deal as defence budget gets a boost. Sort of. And biofuels could bolster Australia's fuel security, so why are we exporting the ingredients to make them? Of course, we have our Tutix Town Talk, and then we'll jump into This Week in Australian History, and we'll finish off, as always, with the 4X Bottle Top Trivia. But before we get into all of that, let's catch up with the last week. Ardeet, hello. What have you been up to?
G'day, DK. I've been, I suppose, predominantly mentally prepping, but also physically prepping a little bit for my hernia operation to tomorrow morning. So by the time this comes out on Friday, it should all be done and dusted. So, yeah, I just want to make sure that I had a paranoia in my head that I was going to be so close to it because I just saw the gastrointestinal bloke the other week. I thought I just don't want any, because it had actually gotten sort of a fair bit worse. I thought I don't want to have any situation where I'm so close to getting it done properly and having to have an emergency thing for it. So I was sort of taking things a little bit easier and. Yeah, look, I'm not. Obviously, it's an operation, so there's always one of those things that there's always in the back of your head a little bit of anxiety about it. But predominantly, I'm actually a little bit excited about it because it's it's going to be done robotically using the Da Vinci robot. Medical robot, and I have a huge, from my layperson's perspective, and because I've sort of off and on followed it. Bits and pieces over the year, and it's just so it gets more and more adept and amazing, and this bloke's apparently quite proficient in it. So it's actually quite exciting to think, well, it's just going to be a minimally invasive surgery, and plus I'm bloody wanting to get rid of this thing. It's a hassle having that inguinal hernia on the right for people who know that, but just basically down near the junk. So yeah, it's an irritating place to have it. So I'm looking forward to having that done. But it's also quite exciting to think, well, it's going to be my first time actually getting something done by a robot. Yeah, obviously the humans controlling the robot, but the robot does the moves and goes down all the little pipes. So I think I end up with like three little holes up above, and everything's done under the surface. So it's. I mean, look, this is the type of thing that really it wasn't. I suppose in my lifetime, and okay, that's I'm 60, but 40, 50 years ago, this was just science fiction type of stuff, and like so many medical procedures nowadays, it's just that's just what they do. It's sort of it was amazing at first, and then interesting for years, and now it's sort of like
it's just routine now.
Just routine, yeah. I mean, there's still some people that, my doctor had given me the choice between this bloke and another guy who did it the old-fashioned way with cutting you open. I thought, well, shit, there's no competition there. Not going back to the old way if I can have this new stuff. So. Yeah, so look, I'll give everyone an update. Well, it might not be much of an update. It might just be, it all went very well, feeling good. But I'll give mates of the podcast an update next week. But yeah, that's why we're doing it a day earlier. So if we miss out on anything happening amazing tomorrow, well, that's on me. So yeah, that's what I've been up to. What about you?
We had a big bonfire over the weekend.
Oh, half your luck.
Yeah, it's love very much enjoy having a nice big bonfire. It was quite cool, which is nice. The not here has been getting cooler. I won't say cold because it's certainly not cold to most of you guys listening. But it was below 20. All right.
Well, that's cold for you, in fairness.
And we saw a ton of satellites, mostly, I assuming, Starlink satellites that were sort of zipping overhead, and you quite often see them in like sort of in a row as they come over.
Okay, excellent.
So I'm assuming it's the Starlink satellites. But it could be. I know there's a couple of other constellations out there, but I just thought it was really cool to see. But part of me is also kind of like, this could kind of ruin, if we get more and more of these, this could kind of ruin the night sky in the future. Look, it wasn't that. It certainly wasn't at the point where it's like, oh no, I feel like, you know, I've missed out on the beauty of the night sky because there was so many things buzzing around. If anything, it kind of enhanced the enjoyment of kind of looking for them. But the little bit, I couldn't help but think in the back of my mind, if this continues in this fashion with them putting so many up there, it could kind of ruin the night sky. And I know that there has been complaints from like photographers and things like that where they're getting the satellites moving and kind of ruining their photography and stuff like that. And I understand that, but I thought it was pretty cool seeing them all kind of fly over. And we did get to see, it wasn't this weekend, but it was a couple of weeks ago. We did see, it must have been a freshly launched constellation because they were all very close together before they spread out. I think it takes them a couple of orbits before they fully get into position. So they were all kind of clumped up in a line. Very, very close, like together as they flew through the sky, and I was like, "Wow, that's actually that's pretty cool to see." Like, because you just sort of go, I don't know, I don't know, I can't say that I particularly think about this sort of stuff too much. It just kind of that technology it just kind of works, right? But when you see it, it's sort of adds to that wonder and splendor of the world around us, and so that was pretty cool to see all of that stuff, but. Like I said, a little bit of me can't help but think, you know.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I remember, Blake, I did an astronomy weekend one, and this was 15 years ago, and even at that stage, he said he and a lot of his mates referred to them satellites as vermin of the sky.
Probably wouldn't go that far, but I definitely understand why the photography guys are very upset about it because, you know, it really does impact their chosen hobby a lot more than me sitting there having a few beers and staring out into the space. But so that was cool. I would implore everyone to get out there and enjoy the night sky while you can, particularly if you're in an area where there is, not super urban, where you do get quite a nice dark sky. So if you can, get out there and enjoy it because I don't know how many years longer we're going to have a clear night sky. So,
well, it'll probably be clear, but there'll be a lot more distractions. I mean, it used to be many years ago that it was a rare thing to see a satellite. Now I would expect that I'd go out and if I stood there for an hour, I'd see several of them. So, yes. But you know, they are really, they are sort of little dots. There's a hell of a lot of sky there. And I would say, I'd piggyback on your idea and I'd say if you're in an urban area and you've never seen a good night sky, grab a B&B or a hotel, you know, a few, even just go a few hours out of the city, somewhere that's, has got very little population, and plan to be just sitting out there looking up for a couple of hours. Now, if it doesn't float your boat, you're obviously dead inside. But you'll probably find that if it's something you haven't experienced before, it's naturally gobsmacking.
It is. When you get a truly dark sky, especially if you've lived in the city your whole life and you haven't really spent much time out either on the water or out in the country, away from the light pollution. It's pretty mind-blowing when you get a really dark sky and your eyes adjust and you get a nice clear night, which we were very grateful to have over the weekend. We haven't had rain here for probably a month now, and it does look like we might get a little bit towards the end of this week, but we were lucky to get a nice, very clear night sky, and it's beautiful. So like you said, get out there, see more of this beautiful country. Speaking of beautiful countries, Australia and Japan have agreed on a new warship deal as defence budget gets a boost. We should put a little asterisk on the boost, though. It's a little bit of creative accounting, let's call it that. Australia and Japan have announced that they have signed a multi-billion-dollar contract for the first of 3 of Australia's next-generation warships at a ceremony aboard the Mogami frigate anchored in Melbourne. Defence Minister Richard Marles and his Japanese counterpart Koizumi Shinjiro joined at top representatives from the massive Chinese conglomerate Mitsubishi Heavy Industries aboard the JS Kumano to celebrate the agreement. The federal government announced in August last year that Mitsubishi had won a fierce battle with the German company for a contract to provide 11 warships to replace Australia's aging Anzac-class frigates. Mr. Miles declared that he wanted to create a seamless defence industrial base with Japan, which he said would be critical to the success of the frigate's program. He said, quote, "There is no country in the world with whom we have a greater strategic alignment than Japan, and that in turn is underpinned by complete trust," end quote. Japan's Defense Minister Koizumi Shinjiro said that the frigates program was, quote, "a major step that was finally being taken to elevate our defense relationship into a greater height. This marks a new beginning for us and for our commitment to Australia." He continued, "I believe there is no limitation on Australia and Japan defense cooperation," end quote. The first warship is scheduled for delivery in December 2029 and is expected to enter service in the 2030s. Australia plans to deploy the ships designed to hunt submarines, strike surface ships, and provide air defence to defend critical maritime trade routes and its northern approaches in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, where China's military footprint is expanding. Japan is in the midst of a significant shift in its strategic and military posture in the face of increasing aggression from China and the unpredictability of the Trump administration. It has moved to relax restrictions on defense exports and loosen the constraints imposed by its pacifist post-World War II constitution. China, meanwhile, has sharply criticized Japan's recent shift, saying it risks undermining the regional stability and departing from its post-war pacifist commitments. Defence Minister Miles threw Australia's weight behind the move, saying that Japan was an industrial powerhouse. He says, quote, "The relaxation of these controls is going to be really important to developing the seamless defence industrial base we'll need to deliver the Mogami project," end quote. I'm curious if this is the beginning of a more defense manufacturing relationship between our two great nations. Certainly sounds that way if you read between the lines. This all comes as Australia's defence spending will climb to $53 billion over the next decade as the federal government says it responds to intensifying global risks. The injection includes a $14 billion lift in spending over the next 4 years. The federal government just released the 2026 National Defence Strategy, which aims to map out the strategic landscape Australia is facing and the capabilities defence will require to meet those future challenges. As always, a copy of the National Defence Strategy is in the show notes if you are interested and really enjoy reading dry government reports. I'm not here to kink shame you if that's what you like. The government claims that the new funding will take Australian defence spending to roughly 3% of GDP by 2033 when measured by using NATO's methodology, which includes defense-adjacent spending in areas like pensions. The $53 billion increase in spending takes into account some projects that have already been announced, including $12 billion towards the upgrade of the Henderson shipyards in Western Australia. The facility will be used to dock and maintain nuclear-powered submarines under AUKUS, and it will also construct the Mogami-class frigates in the future. It also includes between $2 and $5 billion on new investments into drone technology, so watch the space as those projects get further announced. The government has been under pressure from the US to lift its defense spending as a share of GDP as it places similar pressures on its NATO allies. At a meeting in Singapore last year, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told Mr. Miles that the US wanted to see a lift to 3.5% of GDP. Australia's defence spending has typically been measured at roughly 2% of GDP and forecasted to rise to 2.3% by 2033. So, new warships, very exciting, and an increase in defence spending, sort of. All good things as far as I'm concerned, but I do think there is still much room to improve. In my opinion, I think we probably should bump that 2.3 up to at least 3%. But what do you think? Is this a good thing, or are we kind of wasting more money on this stuff?
Good thing.
Look, I've caught you there.
Yeah. I'm caught in the usual bind between my personal ideologies, philosophies, and the reality of politics. Personally, do I think it's a good thing? A lot of it, not overly, but in terms of how defensive rather than offensive it is, I think that those tend to be a good thing, because like it or not, that's the structure that we have here. That's the government's the one that's got the responsibility for this defence. And I would say overall, and mates of the podcast would know we've covered a number of defence things, and that I've particularly learnt a number of things by having to cover them, and also through DK's background. I have come with I'm sort of a bit more of the opinion than what I was, 5-10 years, maybe 5 years ago. I think there's some reasonable decisions being made, and I think a lot of the decisions I can see the justifications for, as opposed to some things in the past where I sort of thought, that's just seems a little bit, there didn't seem to be any real solid, concrete reasons. So what I'm seeing, look, I suppose I'm a little bit more favourable than unfavourable, but it's big plus for me is when it's on the defensive side. I look at that the Mogami class frigate. I do. Well, actually, first of all, look, I don't know much, but it is a nice looking ship. Like, in terms of design, I mean, there's nothing fancy about it, but it looks very functional and sleek. Just from the thing that you included in the show notes, which I mean, that's a very superficial thing to say, but I thought I would mention that because I looked and I thought, looks pretty neat. One of these things. There's that saying that you have along the lines of, we fight the current war with last war's weapons and mindset. It's some version of that. Whoever said it better than me, but that's basically the gist of it. I still find it difficult to work out how we would get past still needing ships. There's other things like there's a lot of there's probably a lot of fighter planes that I can see. Well, drones are going to take them over. There's probably a lot of armoured vehicles that, again, autonomous fighting vehicles. There's a lot of different armaments and equipment that I can see getting replaced or not being needed or being basically irrelevant. But at the moment, I still can't see. I can't see how we don't have a need for a platform on the water. Obviously, the submarines give us something under the water and they allow us to do a number of things, but that idea of having a solid, reliable platform on the water, I still think that's got a lot of, life still left in it. So I can see why it'd be worthwhile investing in this. And just going through the specs that were in that brochure or that thing from the ADF, it seemed to be ticking a lot of boxes and doing it without any unnecessary fanfare. The spend in Australia on the defence, the budget, I know people at the moment have got a very, I'm not saying I'm his biggest fan, particularly not with what's happened in the last year. But as we said before, Trump's a transitory thing. Our relationship with the US goes beyond whoever the current president is. And, a lot of people might not like to hear it, but the US is the big dog. They're our ally. And if we're needing to increase our defence budget to ensure that we're getting the benefits and the protection and knowledge and defence transfer with them, then in some ways it's sort of like, well, tough luck. You sort of have to suck it up. Doesn't mean I like it, but that is the reality of it. So it's I can see the argument for it, and it depends how it's done. Like all this stuff, it all just bloody depends. We've highlighted over the last couple of years, highlighted a couple of projects, missiles and vehicles and now drones and other things that have been used to create an Australian industry, like the defence one being built here, and we expect to see flow-on effects from that. I expect to see flow-on effects from these, and if it's done smart and we're building it here and creating a manufacturing base that is then going to allow knowledge and skills to develop other parts of Australia, I think that can be a positive thing. Obviously my cynical side is I'm a bit, how well I think they'll manage it. I've got a bit of scepticism about that, but just taking it at face value, there is a lot of benefit there. And for us, we're as we've said a number of times, and is obvious when you look on the map, we're basically an island nation. So if it flies, or can cover the distance or sit on the water around it, there's a lot of our economy with regards to what gets exported, with regards to what's manufactured in order to create potential value adding that comes as a flow-on from this. So, short thing is I'm probably more in favour of the defence budget going up than against it, and I think in terms of what we need, this Mogami class frigate and our relationship with Japan that it cements, I tend to think is a good thing. So I don't know whether that sort of surprises you a bit, but what do you think?
No, it doesn't surprise me too much. I think I've softened your opinion on these things over the years. Ha ha ha.
Well, it's true.
I genuinely think this is a great thing. The program for the replacement of the Anzac class frigates was called the Australian General Purpose Frigate Program. That just rolls off the tongue, and it wasn't like it wasn't a it was quite a competitive program, quite frankly. There were some really good ship designs that were thrown into the ring, including a couple of Spanish. There was a South Korean frigate, as well as the German Miko 200, I think it was, which was very competitive, and it was really tossed up between the Mogami and the German option. And I think really what it came down to was because I think broadly speaking, they offered a very similar capability, but the Japanese really made it easy for us to do this deal. They were like, we've got the shipbuilding capacity. We can sell you some existing ships of the fleet that have just been finished but not yet commissioned. We're happy. Oh,
I didn't realize that was part of it. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we ended up going in that direction.
Okay.
But because I know there's 2 ships that have been launched but not commissioned yet. Into their navy, so that I think there was a potential option to take over some of these existing ships.
Just for me and other people, what's the difference between launched and commissioned?
So launched means ships in the water, and generally speaking is pretty much complete. Commissioned, then there's a period of time where systems are essentially kind of tested and make sure everything's up and running and everything like that. And commissioning is when it's officially handed over. It's in our operational capacity, ready to go.
Oh, okay.
Load up, or fill it up with fuel, load it up with the guns, and you're ready to go, sort of thing like that.
Drive it off the lot.
Exactly. So there is quite a bit done, and a lot of it is just testing and familiarization of systems and stuff like that. So a lot of it's quite boring paperwork that goes from launching a ship into the water and actually handing over the keys, kind of thing like that. So depending on the shipbuilder, it may be in various states of completion when it's actually launched into the water. So as far as I know, there's 2. I could be wrong on that though. That were basically in a state of they could essentially hand them over to us if that was the case. That's not the way we're going to do it, which is fine. But as you heard from our defense minister and their defense minister, the relationship is very strong, or at least they want it to be really strong, which I think is really great. I think it's great to have a partner that is more than willing to heavily integrate their systems with our systems and work in a seamless fashion. That seems to work really, really well. And I think ultimately we're quite aligned on our defense ambitions within the Asia-Pacific region. So there's not there's overlapping interests, and there's very, very few conflicts, if any. I just wanted to mention as well, when you said the Mogami is a good-looking ship, it is actually a very, very beautiful lines, very sleek hull. It's the sort of that stealthy shape that a lot of modern frigates are going for, and not that aesthetics are particularly relevant when it comes to military equipment, but I think it's very, very pretty. The other thing is,
we can't shoot that. It's too beautiful.
May give you pause. I don't know. When we contrast to the Anzac class frigates that we're replacing, the HMS Anzac, which has been decommissioned a couple of years ago now, was 28 when she retired, and she was pretty heavily worn. It was the flagship of the fleet for quite a long time and used a lot. But HMS Arunta, which is the second oldest of the fleet of Anzac class frigates, was commissioned back in 1998. So,
oh wow, okay,
It is also 28 years old. I mean, the hull, well, it was launched into the water in 96 and it was handed over and commissioned in 1998. So, it's a 30-year-old hull. So it's getting a bit long in the tooth. Still a good warship, still very deadly and capable. But, it very much is time to upgrade this fleet. You can only keep polishing a turd for so long. No, not that they're turds. They're great warships, and I've been on a couple. Shout out to HMQS Stewart and Warramunga, but the fleet of these warships is aging, and it certainly needs replacement. So I'm very
just
pleased.
Another technical question. So when you say you make that comment about that hull and aging, is it a case of it can be, like, for example, is it something that you could do a hand-me-down to, I don't know, say for argument's sake, Papua New Guinea, that you give it to them, or are you essentially giving them a problem? Like, does that mean that, the hull's sort of in danger of, I don't know, do they wear out? Or is it a case of, you'd have to spend so much money fixing it up that it would just not be worth it? Or is it just a case of things have moved on? Or is it a mixture of all of them? Like, just when you were saying that, I thought, is it just like a used car that you could give to your kid? Or is it like a used car that's so old and crappy, you'd just be giving someone a burden?
Bit of both. So, yes, some of these ships, like Anzac, was pretty flogged because she'd done a lot of worldwide tours and all sorts. So, Gulf Wars and other things. But some of these ships that haven't seen as much operational history are certainly still within reasonable shape. I mean, they're all within reasonable shape. Otherwise, they would no longer be in the fleet. So they are at operational level. I think the problem becomes when you go to hand it over. But I should caveat that by saying that's not always the case. So you can't always just hand a warship over to someone and be like, here you go, good luck, because sometimes they're in a state of absolute disrepair. And this has happened before where other navies have handed over ships and be like, we're donating a ship to you, and it's an absolute wreck and it's pretty much not worth it. I'm not sure what the plan is going to be with the Anzac class. I do think you could hand them over to an allied navy and they could get some use out of them. My first thought would be the New Zealand Defence Force. They They operate two Anzac class frigates that are a slight variation on the model. Same overall hull design, but there's always every nation kind of has their own little quirks and sort of equipment that they prefer over something else, and so on and so forth. But my first thought is I don't see why we could basically just literally hand the Kievas over to them and everything like that. The other problem would be is there is potentially equipment on board that you may not want to gift someone else, or they may not have the ability to use that equipment. So not so much weapon systems, but more like radar technology or integrated systems and those sorts of things. So there's a potential burden there, as well as the materials that the warships are made out of. Warships often, particularly of this vintage, often have asbestos in them and things like that. So depending on the country you're giving it to, they may not want to be burdened with the problem of decommissioning down the line. Like that can be quite a burden as well, from an environmental point of view. So I think it's complicated. I think sometimes there absolutely is, and we have done that a number of times. The Royal Australian Navy has decommissioned particularly like smaller vessels like patrol boats and mine hunters, and then gifted those to our Pacific partner nations, who do find quite a lot of use for them. I think some of those nations would struggle to crew a ship of this size.
Of course. That's a good point. Yeah. So what I saw that Mogami one, if I remember correctly from my red set, it's something that could be crewed with 84, and that was a a good reduction or a number like that. That's a lot of trained people to have.
Yeah, whereas an Anzac class frigate, I think, is like 160 or something like that. It's quite a few more. So it's basically the Mogami, because of the automation of the systems on board, it's about half the crew complement, which means you can essentially, for the same crew complement, you can crew twice as many ships, which gives you a lot more flexibility, and does cut down on costs as well, because you don't have to pay. A big part of military expenditure is in wages. So the fewer people you're paying, the lower that specific bill is. And the other thing is, of course, you've got to remember that a warship of this size and caliber is expensive to have at sea. It uses a lot of fuel. It needs, a large crew. It needs a lot of food and stores and all of those sorts of things. So you have to be a navy of a certain size to pretty much pick up the tab for this. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was conversations, and I'm not privy to anything, so this is just speculation, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was a conversation with New Zealand that probably some of the newer Anzac class frigates may get sold to them. So that they can, because they do have quite a small navy, particularly. Well, their entire defense force is quite small, but their navy in particular. So they may want to take one or possibly two. But it wouldn't surprise me if the rest of them are pretty much just broken up for scrap or potentially sunk for reefs, which is a bit sad, but it is kind of the nature of the beast. So. Yep. But look, on the defense spending side of things, I think it would be better if we bump that up to that 3%. The way that NATO's methodology for defense spending, basically how they work out how much money you're spending, is quite different to how we've traditionally done it. So when we do factor in, there's things in it, what we call defense spending, that aren't included traditionally in our budget that are included in the NATO budget. So just by using their methodology, suddenly our budget looks a lot better than it is, which is a little bit cheeky and comes back to what I was saying earlier about that creative accounting. Right. But at the same time, there has been a boost in funding, and I do think that this government and Angus Taylor, the leader of the opposition, is also making noise about the creative accountant that's going on, and that we need to kind of actually bump the budget up a bit better anyway, and so on and so forth. So there has been some priority shifts in the defense budget around equipment acquisition and things like that. And I sort of feel that we if we can have the budget to do everything, I think we should. And I understand that priorities shift and so on and so forth, but I don't like the idea that we're cutting back programs to increase new programs and things like that. We're already, in my opinion, we're already underspending. So maybe we should bump up some of that defense spending. But this is a big priority for me. I think the warship fleet certainly needs an upgrade, and I think this is a really good way to spend it. So I'm excited for this. All right, let's move on. It's time for our Two Ticks Town Talk.
I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the desert, fair man. I've breathed the mountain air, man. I've traveled up.
All right, this week's Two Ticks Ship Talk. We're focusing on focusing on a strange moment of colonial history that has been wrongly described as a mutiny. This week, we'll be discussing the weird and wonderful history of the colonial navy of Queensland, specifically the HMQS Gayundah, which is something we've mentioned on This Week in Australian History. And I thought it's time that we actually tell this tale. So.
Oh, good.
I want you to picture in your mind a warm spring afternoon in Brisbane, October 1888. 20 armed policemen under the command of the Commissioner of Police marched down Edward Street and deployed to take up positions in Queen's Park. This police activity, which quickly drew a large crowd, was not an exercise, but deadly earnest. But the target of their actions was not a criminal gang, nor a righteous crowd. Rather, it was a gunboat, Gayundah, flagship and pride of the Queensland Marine Defence Force. The police were under orders from the Colonial Secretary to take the ship by force if necessary and to remove its captain from command. Now, allow me to tease you for a moment while I explain the circumstances that have led up to this moment. So strap in. This is one hell of a story. Originally discovered and settled and explored by the Royal Navy, Britain, Australia, or rather the Australian colonies, relied comfortably for many years on the protection of the Royal Navy, safe in the knowledge that they were shielded by the Rule Britannia, Britain's ultimate might. As the various colonies expanded in their population and wealth, however, and as any major threat of real invasion or attack seemed to recede into the distance, the colony's power began to make moves in the middle of the 19th century to withdraw its forces from said colonies. The last of the British Army garrison troops of the 18th Regiment of Foot, the Royal Irish Regiment, were withdrawn in 1870. Prior to that, in 1865, the British government had passed an act to provide for the naval defence of the colonies by the colonies themselves. The Colonial Naval Act, to be specific. Although this act provided for the establishment of permanent and part-time naval forces at the expense of the colonies, it actually discouraged the colonies from obtaining and operating seagoing ships, and was largely designed to ensure that the colonies would provide the Royal Navy with secure ports and bases in the event of war. Though this did not discourage several of the colonies, most notably Victoria, who had the most powerful navy, probably because they were also the richest colony at the time, South Australia, and of course plucky little Queensland individually raised their own navies. Naval defence in Queensland was very much an on-again, off-again affair for many years, and development going through fairly regular cycles of plenty and famine with invasions and war scares, usually involving the French or the Russians, seeing naval defence expanded and then lavishly funded, and then seeing funds and government support dry up. Where have we seen this before? Finally, nothing. It's the years that go, little has changed, quite frankly. Finally, in 1882, following reports of an increasing Russian naval activity in the Pacific, the decision was made to form the Queensland Maritime Defence Force. And the following year, the Queensland government purchased a Thornycroft second-class torpedo boat, which it named Mosquito. HMQS Mosquito sat idle for some time when it arrived in Brisbane, as there was no formal crew for her. So they put her on the deck of a ship, sailed her out from England. She arrived and sat there while they got themselves organised. Eventually, they did put her into action, and during her very first outing on the Brisbane River, it streaked off at full power in the wrong direction and dumped the official party overboard. Off to a great start. Anxious to increase the strength of its fledgling little navy, the Queensland government made inquiries to the British Admiralty regarding the acquisition of 2 gunboats. As it just so happened, 2 flat-iron type gunboats, so called because the silhouette they bore an uncanny resemblance to the household appliance, an iron.
Flat iron.
Yeah. They were being built on the Tyne at the time. They were originally destined for a South American republic, but the 2 hulls were taken over by the Admiralty and completed for Queensland under the name Gayundah and Palima, Aboriginal words meaning lightning and thunder, respectively. Gayundah, however, was specifically designed as a gunboat, whereas Palima was originally designed as a survey ship. Because Gayundah was designed as a gunboat, she was a gunboat in her entire life. So she weighed 360 tons. The ship was 120 feet or 36.5 meters long, with a beam of 26 feet, 8 meters, and drew 9.5 feet or 2.8 meters draft. As she was completed, she was armed with one 8-inch or 203 millimeter forward gun, which is pretty formidable on a ship this size. One 152 millimeter, 6-inch gun aft, and four 1.5-inch or 38 millimeter Norfield guns, which are small caliber cannons. With a bunker capacity of 75 tons of coal, she had an economical cruising range of 800 miles and carried a crew complement of 55 sailors and officers. To command this new ship, Gayundah, and the rest of the Queensland Maritime Defence Force for that matter, Queensland secured the services of Commander Henry Townley Wright, an experienced officer who had joined the Royal Navy in 1859 and had seen extensive service afloat and ashore in China, where he received a mention in dispatches for his service during the China War, and in Africa, where he held various appointments at the Cape of Good Hope station and received another mention in dispatches for service in the Naval Brigade during the Kafir War. Commander Wright had been forced by age to retire on half pay in 1881 and jumped at the chance of commanding the Queensland Navy. Remember that. That will be important for later. For its part, the Queensland government congratulated itself. Yes, much back-patting and many beers were had on securing the services of such a distinguished and highly decorated officer. We shall call this foreshadowing. Commander Wright sailed with his command from Newcastle on the 13th of November 1884, bound for Gibraltar. From Gibraltar, Gayundah steamed across the Mediterranean to Malta, where poor weather delayed their departure until the end of December. On December 30th, 1884, once again at sea and bound for Queensland via the Suez Canal, with coaling stops at Ardeet, Colombo, Batavia, Thursday Island, and Townsville. At the first three ports, Gayundah took on coal as extra deck cargo to ensure that she had adequate fuel for the long ocean legs of her voyage. And she eventually reached Brisbane on the 27th of March, 1885, after a voyage of 134 days, of which about 95 of those days were spent at sea. A fairly creditable record of seamanship and endurance, particularly for such a small ship. Not sure that I would have wanted to be on that crew through that. I can imagine it would have been pretty full on at some of those places. Unfortunately for the crew, there was no rest following their long voyage, as Gayundah arrived right in the middle of another Russian war scare and was immediately ordered to take part in joint naval and military maneuvers then underway around Brisbane. But the ship and her crew performed very well during the maneuvers, and the Gayundah proved herself to be particularly well suited to operation in the estuarine waters around Brisbane. At the end of maneuvers on the 7th of April, Gayundah was finally able to go into South Brisbane Dock for much needed clean and overhaul. She came out of the dock a month later on the 10th of April a few days later on the 10th of April and entered into a round of coastal patrols and picket duty until the war scare finally subsided in mid-May. Following the Great Russian Scare, Gayundah settled down into a routine of training, cruises, and inspections, managing to lead a very quiet life for a couple of years. During this period, Commander Wright apparently expended much energy ensuring that both his ship and his men, and those of the rest of his small command, both regular and reserve, reached a high level of efficiency as possible. Then, in 1887, the court-martialed Lieutenant Spencer Hegseth upset the quiet and ordered existence of the Maritime Defence Force. So strap in. This is where it all goes wrong. Lieutenant Hegseth had been commissioned into the Queensland Maritime Defence Force in 1885 and was employed as first lieutenant of Gayundah. Hegseth was apparently not a good money manager or was somewhat, let's just say he preferred an expensive lifestyle outside of his means, to put it nicely. And by the early months of 1887, he was in severe financial difficulties. While this had been developing for some time, Commander Wright was either not aware of it or was prepared to turn a blind eye to it until such a time he was no longer able to ignore it. This occurred when Hegseth borrowed £10 from a seaman and issued a bad cheque in return. Unfortunately for all concerned, especially Hegseth, the Queensland Maritime Defence Force did not have enough officers to form a court-martial, and Commander Wright requested that the Admiral commanding the Australian station convene the court-martial instead. Rear Admiral Tyon was aghast at this suggestion, claiming quite correctly that he did not have the authority to try an officer holding a colonial commission. This led to a really long back and forth between Rear Admiral Tyon and Commander Wright on how to proceed. And I won't bore you with the details, but to cut a long story short, Hegseth had been confined in his cramped quarters aboard the Gayundah for 62 days until he was eventually sentenced by a Queensland civilian court, found guilty and dismissed from naval service. Both the government opposition and the press made a much mileage out of the case, with both parties rallying against the severity of the sentence, and the press in particular questioning just who was in charge of the Queensland Maritime Defence Force, the Queensland Parliament or the British Admiralty. Commander Wright, as a senior naval officer, was head of the Queensland Government Department and therefore responsible for its overall finances. In September 1887, no more than 4 months after the scandal of Lieutenant Hegseth's court-martial, a report by the Queensland Auditor General stated that he found very unsatisfactory state of affairs in the department. I'm not surprised, quite frankly, that after this just kind of ludicrous court-martial scenario had occurred, that the Queensland Auditor General decided to look into the finances of the Queensland Maritime Defence Force. The Auditor General's report alleged that Commander Wright had incurred a total of £89, 14 shillings and 1 pence of funds, which had been incorrectly disbursed, which is it's not a lot. It's about $200 in today's value. These funds were found to be for payments for lodgings ashore for Wright and his officers when ship was taking its annual cruise up north, although they did have their normal accommodations aboard as well. The Auditor General also took exemption to Wright's use of departmental funds to purchase crockery for his personal use and wine for his personal table, and the use of members of crew as personal servants whilst ashore. But the point was most painfully stung when the Queensland government was the revelation that the man whose professional services they had so warmly congratulated themselves on in securing back in 1884 was in fact an undischarged bankrupt who had pledged half of his Royal Navy pay to his creditors in England prior to sailing to Queensland. It was now revealed that Wright had not paid any money to his agents in 2 years, and that having been finally placed on the Royal Navy retired list, his creditors were beginning an action for bankruptcy to recover their money. The scandalised Queensland government, already disenfranchised by Wright's financial malpractice, strongly suggested that he should resign. As his appointment was not due to expire until the end of 1888, Commander Wright refused, thereby antagonising the Queensland government even further. But although the government was not happy with Wright, they actually lacked either the will or the means to dismiss him, and he continued to serve as both commander of the Maritime Defence Force and the captain of the Gayundah.
Huh.
And he also kept the crockery and continued to use his crewmen as servants. Although the government did have a little win, they did manage that the cost of his table wine to be deducted from his pay. So, small concession. This continued on until September 1888, when Wright was finalising his affairs prior to leaving Queensland. He was entitled to 3 months' paid leave and now inquired of the government as to whether or not he could take his remaining sum as a lump sum. Sorry, his remaining pay as a lump sum. He actually sent his wife to go and do this. This is how bad the relationship was at this time. He refused to actually go to the government offices and talk to them himself. At first, the government was quite agreeable, but subsequently withdrew its agreement on the revelation that Wright did not intend to leave Queensland until 1889. And they directed that he should continue to draw his pay at the normal intervals. As Wright was intending to proceed on long leave, however, the government was anxious to be rid of him, and they ordered him to hand over Gayundah to Lieutenant Taylor, formerly the captain of the Mosquito, who had been promoted to first lieutenant of the flagship following the demise of Lieutenant Hexeth. Taylor, who, like the unfortunate Hexeth, held his commission from the colonial government, was simultaneously ordered to take command, and he penned a short but polite note to Wright of this effect. Commander Wright was not having any of it, however, and immediately placed Taylor under arrest for technical mutiny. He reasoned that his reasoning was that the government's actions were tantamount to dismissal and that he held an imperial commission and his ship flew the White Ensign. And the only person who could dismiss him was the admiral commanding the Australian station. So this kind of comes back to this confusion of earlier as to who is actually employing Commander Wright, like who has the jurisdiction to actually command him to do certain things. It seems in my mind that Commander Wright very much felt like he was still in the employ of the Royal Navy, but was more than happy to take his orders and salary from the colonial government. So the situation pretty quickly escalated as the Colonial Secretary, learning of Wright's actions, formally dismissed him on the 24th of October 1888. But Commander Wright was not to be rid of so easily, and he had one trump card left to play: his ship. He called the coaling lighters alongside. This is small boats that carry coal, and sent orders for food and stores, apparently with the intention of taking the Gayundah to sea, where once he was beyond the 3-mile limit, he would no longer be subject to colonial control, but would come under the discipline of the Royal Navy Squadron instead. Wright could thus use the threat of sailing the ship in order to have his way with the government, and at worst, he could actually carry out his threat and then lay his case before the admiral. If Wright was planning to carry out his activities without the advanced knowledge of the government, however, he was to be disappointed. As a result of his earlier misdealings, the captain's delegation to purchase stores directly had been removed, and the bills for the coal and stores had been were tendered on the Colonial Secretary's office. The Colonial Secretary immediately sent a senior officer of his department to the Gayundah to ascertain the state of affairs. On boarding the ship, the officer, a Mr. Ryder, discovered that Wright was ashore at the naval office and that the ship was in charge of Sub-Lieutenant Russell. Lieutenant Taylor was also aboard, of course, but he was under arrest and therefore could not exercise the duty over the officer of the day. Mr. Ryder requested both officers to accompany him ashore to try and just sort things out. Taylor refused, as he believed to do so would be in breach of discipline, and although Russell complied, it was only with a great deal of misgivings. As Ryder and Russell disembarked from the ship at the ferry landing, they were met by Wright, who ordered Russell to return on board under threat of dire consequences, and sent Ryder on his way. The ball was now in the Colonial Secretary's court, and he immediately contacted the Commissioner of Police and requested him to, quote, proceed on board the Gayundah and removed Captain Wright from the ship, end quote. As 20 armed police marched down Edward Street, a large crowd quickly gathered and took up every available vantage point. The crew of Gayundah were at their normal stations, and as the police deployed to take up firing positions covering his ship, Wright, who remained totally calm throughout the whole incident, casually asked his gunner, "If I asked you to fire on Parliament House, where would you aim?" The unflappable gunner's mate replied, "About midships, sir." Watching the drama unfold before them, many of the crowd speculated whether Gayundah would actually fire on the police and possibly even sail off as a pirate. With his men deployed, the commissioner boarded the ship accompanied by the police inspector, the colonial undersecretary, and a magistrate, and informed the cool and collected Commander Wright that he intended to take the ship by force if necessary. In reply, Commander Wright read his imperial commission aloud, and a great deal of argument ensued. Wright never lost his temper and very astutely ensured that the government party admitted that his removal was by force. Having achieved his aim, he went to his cabin, wrote a letter of protest, making sure that a copy was available for the press. He then piped all hands and read to the crew the government letters and his protest, and formally released Lieutenant Taylor from arrest. This done, he took leave of all hands and departed the ship. As he rowed away, Lieutenant Taylor read his commission to the crew as the white ensign was hauled down and replaced by a Queensland blue ensign, to the great relief, no doubt, of the Queensland government and the admiral commanding the Australian station and, of course, Lieutenant Taylor as well. Lucky for all... Poor Lieutenant Taylor, he's done nothing wrong here. He's just following orders. Lucky for all concerned, the affair had been concluded without violence or bloodshed, although possibly to the great disappointment of the crowd, Commander Wright left the colony in due course and has not proved possible to discover of what became of him. He pretty much disappeared. It's speculated he returned to the UK, but there is no record, and I tried looking, and many other people have as well. He just kind of vanished. Lieutenant Taylor remained commander of the Queensland Maritime Defence Force until 1891, when he was replaced by Commander Drake. For reasons unknown, possibly because of his action in obeying Wright's orders to return to the ship, he was deemed to have sided with Wright in the affair, and the unfortunate Sub-Lieutenant Russell was dismissed from service, which I feel like is pretty harsh on him as well.
A bit rough.
Yeah. It was to be many years before Gayundah flew the white ensign again, but she did. She continued to serve in the Queensland Maritime Defence Force through good years and bad until Federation, at which point she became a unit of the Commonwealth Naval Forces and then into the Royal Australian Navy. And once again, she hoisted the white ensign. During World War I, she served as a guard ship and minesweeper, following which she was employed as a tender until she was sold from the naval service in 1922. She saw a long and faithful, though unspectacular service as a sand and gravel barge on the Brisbane River until she met her end on the 2nd of June 1958, when she was scuttled as a breakwater at Woody Point in Moreton Bay, where she remains to this day. A sad end for the once flagship and pride of the Queensland Maritime Defence Force. I must thank Graham Wilson for his incredible retelling of the story, which I have used extensively here. So his retelling is in the show notes, so go give his website a bit of love. If you do want to see the remains of the HMQS Gayundah, you can. It is
just
found.
about to ask you that question.
It's still there. Well, what's left of it. It's still found at its resting place on Woody Beach. Woody Point on the beach there in Redcliffe in Brisbane. The access, if you do want to get down onto the sand, because it's literally just like on the beach. The access is pretty average. There's no like steps or anything, as far as I could see.
Is that within Moreton Bay?
Yes.
Right, okay.
So you will need to scuttle down some large rocks just to get access to the sand, but most able-bodied people can do that. But you don't specifically need to. It can be observed from the Esplanade, the main road, which is actually called Gayundah Esplanade, which I think is a nice little nod to the ship. But yeah, so it is there. Redcliffe's actually a beautiful area of northern Brisbane. And if you're in the Brisbane area, or if you're a Brisbane local and you need an excuse to get out this weekend, go and have a look at the ship. It's pretty much it's on the corner of Woodcliff Crescent. There's a roundabout which takes you down onto the main esplanade, and it's sort of right there, just off the hill. You can see it from the main hill, but if you head down into the park, you can scatter down the rocks and then you can actually see it. You can see it on Google Maps, though it's sort of in shadow from a couple of buildings, so it's quite hard to make out. But if you Google it, it'll take you straight to it. So that is the story of the pretty incredible story of the Gayundah, a ship that didn't see any combat, but certainly had a very interesting and sort of unfortunate circumstances handed down to it, but still remains a piece of history to this day.
Oh, great to get some of those details out. As you said, we've had that had the Gayundah come up a couple of times I'm pretty sure it was This Week in Australian History where it gets mentioned. But to get the full story, that's interesting. You do sort of wonder what happened to Wright, whether it was a case of he thought, I'm just going to be skipping out of my debt all up, whether he got off, he said, I'm heading back to the UK, but, took off somewhere else, or did go back to the UK, assumed a new name, or just went back, fell into poverty and obscurity, and there was no reason to keep records of him.
I like to think that he lived out the rest of his days like in North Queensland or somewhere else here in Australia, and just took on a new name and, just disappeared into... I'm going back to the motherland. I'll be taking off next week and then just wet bush. Pretty much. I really do hope that's sort of what ended up to. It is a bit disappointing that we don't know, sort of, because it does sound like whilst he sort of could have handled things a little bit better. I think things. I wouldn't, from the descriptions. And I've kind of condensed some of this down because the story is considerably longer. He did sound like quite a good officer, quite a good leader, and his men certainly seemed to have a lot of respect and love for him. So I think he was very good at what he did. He wasn't particularly good with the politics of it all. And I think had very little tolerance for the civilian government and a bit of riffraff that was going on. So I think that was kind of his undoing. He clearly enjoyed a bit of wine and was accustomed to a British officer's life that probably was a bit. He probably should have tempered his expectations of living in early late 1900s Queensland. But anyway, we wish him all the best wherever he ended up. And what a fun story for
yeah.
so look out! I may do some more Two Ticks Ship Talks, if we can find some interesting stories of ships, particularly from colonial Australia. I know there's quite a few steamships down in Victoria, or steamboats, I should call them, on the rivers. So we may find some of them. If you've got any suggestions, if you're listening to this going, oh, I know a good one, please let us know at australiatalks@proton.me. Send us an email and we'll look into it. All right.
Always happy to hear suggestions.
Let's move on. The fuel crisis. Biofuels. Why aren't we making them? Or are we? Australia controls less than 20% of our liquid fuel supply that relies on imports for the other 80% that we need to keep this nation moving. As the war in Iran continues, Australia's fuel security is front of mind for policymakers and motorists while they fill up at the pump. Proponents of biofuels argue that this doesn't need to be this way. Instead, Australia could make fuel from our waste and organic materials. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation and others believe Australia could create more than half of the fuel that it needs, which is a pretty bold claim. Biofuels are made from organic matter, making them a renewable alternative to fossil fuels. Creating fuel from renewable sources like sugarcane residue, canola, and waste materials isn't new, but it is something rarely used in Australia. Dr. Fraser Thompson from Cyan Ventures, who create synthetic fuels, say every year we're exporting roughly $3 billion worth of feedstocks and unprocessed raw materials that are used as ingredients for biofuels in other countries. These countries refine those ingredients and we buy back from them. God. Which is just
How often do we hear that story?
Yeah, it's always the way. But it isn't without precedent. Other countries and other jurisdictions like California have ramped up their reliance on biofuels, as we probably should. Biofuels aren't without their criticisms, however. Aside from the higher cost to manufacture, some raise concerns about the environmental impact on land use to feed farm stocks and competition between food and fuels. Biodiesel can be used to run heavy transport like trucks and machinery, of course. Ethanol is derived from corn or sugarcane, among other feedstocks, and can be blended with petrol to extend the amount we have available. E10 is fairly available pretty much across Australia, which is a blend of 10% ethanol. But in other parts of the world, they have E15 and even E25, which is a 25% ethanol blend. From what I could see, it appears that it's only available in Brazil, but I can't see why other countries can't do it. Yes, there isn't as much energy in ethanol as there is in refined petroleum, but you know, it's better than nothing. As Australia counts down the number of days of fuel in storage, embracing biofuels could expand how long our reserves can last. And what's crazy is that there is already substantial biofuel producers in Australia, but the Australian industry suffers from a lack of demand. So even in the middle of a fuel supply crisis triggered by the Middle East conflict, our refineries aren't operating at their full capacity. The biggest factor holding back the Australian market is that we've enjoyed cheap imported fuels for a long time and have not pushed the development of local industry. This is pretty much the same reason why we've shut down our refineries across the country. Renewable Fuels development company HMR Energy supports big fuel using sectors that have difficulty reducing their carbon emissions. Industries including aviation, maritime, and the chemical sector are what's called hard to abate when it comes to cutting carbon. HAMR's Energy, Mr. Stribley, says Australia's agricultural sector and renewable power sources have the potential to make it a world leader in this space. He says, quote, "If you consider Europe, they look at us and they're envious of the actual products we have here. So yeah, the opportunity is exponential," end quote. Government actions started before this crisis. Back in September, Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Energy Minister Chris Bowen stood at Ampol's Lytton refinery in Brisbane's northern suburbs to announce a $1.1 billion in grants to promote the expansion of biofuel production. Ampol's chief executive, Matthew Halliday, lauded the Clean Fuels Fund program. He says, quote, "With our partners, we're starting a project that would produce around 750 million litres of sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel. The heavy part of the transportation sector is not an easy area to abate, and that's where a drop-in solution, low-carbon liquid fuels are a logical option." End quote. But even as he praised the supply-side measure that would increase the sustainable fuel available, he said he looked forward to continuing to work with the government around the demand side of measures to create policy to force more use. Pretty much no one wants to use it is the big problem. Lytton is one of just two remaining refineries in Australia, with the other being Viva Energy's Corio refinery on the outskirts of Geelong in Victoria that caught fire last week. At the time, Mr. Bowen noted that 70% of our canola was leaving the country to be turned into biofuels to drive Asia. He said, quote, "Exports are great." 70%. "Exports are great, but even better, we'll be taking that canola and turning it into lower carbon fuels here in Australia, and that's what this scheme will do." End quote. So why does it feel like we live in a country where I feel like we just assume everything's always going to be 100% fine all the time, and we seem to really very rarely plan for big disruptions, or we just export raw products to the rest of the world and buy them back afterwards. I thought we would have learnt from COVID, but apparently not. I imagine your thoughts are quite similar on this, but I guess my question for you is, you have a diesel vehicle. Would you put biodiesel in it, or are you kind of skeptical that there may be some mechanical and fuel issues?
Look, if I was satisfied that the fuel quality was good, wouldn't have an issue at all. Now, when I fill up my car, same Mrs. Ardeet, she's not diesel, but she's on 95. We normally just stick with the majors, and you can argue back and forth a whole lot of people on that, but there's a certain reliability in the supply chain that, to me, if it's a couple of cents more, I'd rather go that way. Yeah, there's also people who, they're onto multiple cars and have always gone down to the cheapest fuel you can get and not had any issues. So it's good luck each to their own. But I tend to want to have a certain level of confidence in what I'm putting in the fuel tank, because you get it wrong once and you can bugger up your car for forever. So yeah, I would use it if it got enough of tech. Well, for example, I would use it if Ampol or BP or Mobil or Shell, if they had biofuel, that would probably be good enough for me. Probably wouldn't run out to version 1, but I would definitely give it a crack. I do get when this topic comes up, I do get a little bit frustrated with there's always the constant callback to, renewables are cheaper and we should all drive EVs, and we've discussed before a number of times the advantage of that. But to me, I think it's limited thinking, and it ignores the value of having multiple energy streams. And multiple energy streams creates potential redundancy for the economy. And as mates of the podcast know, we're often talking about how the energy determines your economy. So I find that a bit of a frustrating mindset, because it tends to dissuade companies from investing more in this. It tends to dissuade people from thinking more about it. So look, we both love renewables, and we talked about some of the advantages of EVs last week. But I don't want all the eggs in one basket. It's also, it's perpetually frustrating. It's just another version of dig it out of the ground, send it back, and buy the value added product. We often bang on. Yeah, we heard both our frustration when you read that out. So, look, I suppose there's there's also there's always cost, and that matters a lot, but there's also value and also benefits, and that's not always necessarily going to be a dollar thing, a dollar value. It also sometimes these industries do need to be getting rolling. I mean, if you had biodiesel and it became a commercial product, what was that, $3 billion worth of feedstock exported? Now, if it was $3 billion worth of the feedstock gets exported, but we didn't buy it back because we weren't using it, I would think, oh, okay, well, fair enough. Isn't that good? We're sort of selling what we don't need, or that's a profitable export. But when you get to that buy it back bit, you think, okay, so there's obviously a demand for it here. Yep. So it's, how do we work it out so that we can service that demand without having to send it offshore? Now, I don't know all the chemistry and mechanics and laborious nature of converting this feedstock to biofuel, and I would imagine we're going to find it's a similar thing as we found with the refineries overseas being far more competitive than those here in Australia. However, it's almost like it's just accepted as a fait accompli, and we can't do much about it. That's how it is. So I don't have an answer. I'm just having a bit of a bellyache at the moment, but I do look at that and I think, God, there's a loop that you close that, and suddenly you've got a domestic market. And as we see nowadays, and unfortunately as we're seeing more and more, particularly the last couple of years, supply chains, self-sufficiency, the independence of our defence, and I consider, and I think both you and I are in agreement on this, but I consider security of energy supplies an integral part of our defence. You see all that, and it just gets gets a bit frustrating when you're seeing that. There's always fanboys too. I mean, to be realistic, I can't remember the name of the bloke who said, I can't remember, he was painting this incredible picture of, it's going to be the ultimate this and the ultimate that. So, you can't just say, oh, let's go in boots and all, and it's all going to be wonderful. So you do have to temper it with some common sense and some accounting, but you have to drive it with some vision. And unfortunately, this is yet another industry and energy source that, to me, is not getting driven with any vision. What about you? How do you feel about it?
Pretty much the same, I guess. Like the frustration is that, once again, just like you said, dig it up, ship it off, buy it back. And it's just like, come on, guys, let's do some it's not that we don't know how to do it. It's not that we don't do it. It's just that there's not enough demand here. And I think that is partially driven by government policy. I think there's also a lack of education around biofuels. I've heard a lot of people say stuff like, don't put E10 in your car because it'll gum up injectors and da-da-da-da-da. I think most cars made after like 2005 or something like that. Double check your car, but pretty much any car made in the last 20 years, petrol car obviously, can use E10, and it doesn't make any major difference to engine wear or life or things like that. The chemistry is good enough. I know there is biodiesel blends that are pretty much the same because, of course, with common rail diesel engines, they can be quite sensitive to fuel. And so you do have to be a bit more careful. They're not like the old diesels where you can just put filtered bloody grease in there and they'll run. Which, that'd be amazing. Unfortunately, I don't have a diesel engine like that. Mine is a temperamental little princess. And so I have to baby her. But there are blends where it's like 5 or 10% biodiesel blends.
Okay.
Yeah, they're just not sold here in Australia. I don't know why. Give us some biodiesel as well as an option. But again, there's just not. I don't know if it's driven by consumers or if it's like distributors don't really care for it. I'm not sure. I don't really know where the solution for this problem is, but I think people just aren't really aware of it, and so they just chug along. A lot of fuel stations around the country do have diesel, and then they have premium diesel, which is just it's got some additives in it to help clean your engine and things like that, which is definitely beneficial every now and again, sure, but. I don't see why we couldn't replace, say, the premium diesel pump with like a biodiesel blend or something like that instead. Maybe it is like a logistics issue in terms of the mixing at the pump or something like that. I'm not sure. But to me, it just seems like if we can do it with E10, I don't understand why we can't do it with diesel as well. And that would just take a lot of pressure off, particularly in a situation like this. Like, I think this is one of the levers that the government could pull and be like, look, we're in a fuel crisis. Diesel is the lifeblood of this country. So we're mandating that by the end of the year, all the major fuel suppliers need to roll out biodiesel as an option or something like that. I don't understand why there's not the political will for something like that. It sounds like... Oh,
can you imagine the screeching that would come out if you had a government of either side saying supporting diesel in any way?
Well, no, you're probably right, because the cookers are going to go, they're going to try and blow up my engine. And then the bloody tankies are going to go, they're promoting, they're trying to kill the planet. And yeah, so you're right. You're going to lose either way, so you may as well do it, right?
Exactly. You're going to lose either way. In fact, that's probably a key point, DK.
Well, I mean, they've literally called it the Cleaner Fuels Fund Program, which is a little bit of greenwashing, I will have to say, but it is technically cleaner. You know, if you're putting in 10% canola or whatever it is, I'm not sure it's the exact chemistry. It's but with the biodiesel stuff. But if we're putting in a biodiesel blend into the regular diesel fuel supply and say it's only 10%, we're still taking 10%. We're adding 10% into the diesel supply, right? Which is significant. It's a lot. That's a lot. And so, and that's really going to take the edge off in a situation like this. It's perfect. So it is quite frustrating everyone seems to be talking about it, but there's no real action happening. And I guess that's where the frustration for me comes from. It's once again another one of these, the government's putting a program into place, throwing money at a problem, and then kind of just, I don't know, I feel like maybe they don't go far enough to be like, no. Like, you need to actually do something with this, not just, well, look, we increased production, but people weren't buying it, so we stopped and we took all your money and, we tried. You know, it feels like that happens a fair bit, and it's just kind of like, come on, can we do a bit more with this? Can we give money with a few more conditions or something like that? So there are a lot of industries that are trying to decarbonize and things like that. So, trains in this country quite almost exclusively run on diesel. So there's an opportunity to start with the rail infrastructure. All trains need to use 10% biofuel. I am talking just off the top of my head. I don't know if they already do. That may be a thing. I'm not sure. But as an example, that would be really low-hanging fruit because it's not a consumer-driven. It's hard to get people to take up a thing. I know E10 has kind of struggled here in Australia for the same reason, where people are skeptical about it. And so the consumers will pick, say, like 91 over E10 or something like that. So if we can kind of force industry to take on the initial burden of this, it will kind of filter out from there. So I don't know. I think there's political, a little bit of political will, but not enough to really get it over the line, which I think is so often the case in Australian politics, which could be a bit frustrating, but, you know, I don't know. Maybe we're a little bit freer by having our choices. So I'm not sure what I want, a more angry government that does more, or perhaps, you know, but maybe it's better this way. I'm not sure, but I would like to have a biodiesel option. That would be good, right? Because I've got some machinery that run on diesel. Right. That it's fine. I could put biodiesel in there, no worries at all. So, but I don't want to go down the route of making my own at home and stuff like that because it's a lot of hassle and it's really not that worth it for the amount of fuel that I burn with these things. So if I could have a commercial solution, I would be quite happy. So, and I'm sure lots of other tradies and excavator, you know, operators and so on and so forth would be quite happy with that as well. So, look, I don't know. Watch this space. Hopefully we'll come up with a solution soon. Probably not. This will probably die as soon as this fuel crisis is over, and and we'll have learned nothing, just like we always do. But anyway, things keep chugging on for the lucky country. Let's find out what's happened in the past for us in This Week in Australian History.
This week in Australian history, we're covering 17th to the 23rd of April. April 17th in 1840, John Ridley, an English-born inventor and agriculturalist, arrives in South Australia and he invented the stripper harvester, revolutionising wheat farming and boosting South Australia's economy as a major grain producer. Yeah, it just had like little tassels on the... No.
I was going to say.
God, no.
You could only pull it with a beautiful woman.
That's right.
Scantily dressed.
God, you two are so unmature. Tis unmature. 1935, Qantas operates its first overseas passenger flight from Brisbane to Singapore. 2003, the Woomera Immigration Reception and Processing Centre is closed and the detainees transferred to the Baxter Immigration Reception and Processing Centre near Port Augusta. 2005, the Bali Nine, a group of 9 people later convicted of attempting to smuggle heroin from Indonesia to Australia, are arrested in Indonesia. And it got international attention because there was a number of death sentences for some of the members, and there's a whole lot of Australian diplomatic efforts. And there were executions occurred 10 years later for I can't remember how many of the Bali Nine. It was at least
2 of them.
2, yeah.
2 of them got executed.
Yeah. Yep. I don't know that they're ever referred to as the Bali Nine Brains Trust. But yeah, it's always interesting. You can have the death penalty, but people will still give it a crack.
Yep.
2005 as well, ownership of a replica of HM Bark Endeavour is transferred to the Australian National Museum, and it had been built for the 1988 bicentenary.
And it's a really good replica. And it is in Sydney Harbour. If you're in Sydney, go and have a look at it. It's at the Maritime Museum. It's really cool.
That's not bad. Look, I'm not a big maritime person, but the Maritime Museum is worth a sticky beak.
It's one of my favourites. I
bet it is for you.
Yeah, for me. Oh, what a surprise.
But it is. I thought it was interesting. April 18th in 1831, the Sydney Morning Herald, Australia's oldest newspaper, is first published in Sydney and New South Wales, and it was originally called the Sydney Herald. April 19th in 1770, Captain James Cook and the crew of HMS Endeavour first sight the eastern coast of Australia. That was near Point Hicks, which is now in Victoria. And that initiated the European charting of the East Coast during the voyage, and claiming of the continent for all the political things associated for that. 1984 Advance Australia Fair is proclaimed as Australia's national anthem, and green and gold are proclaimed as Australia's national colours, and that change replaced God Save the Queen. It was after a public plebiscite. 2006, severe tropical cyclone Monica makes landfall near the Lockhart River in far north Queensland. It was one of the most intense ever recorded in the southern hemisphere. Minimal damage due to its remote path, but it was a big one. April 20th in 1770, HM Bark Endeavour, the real one, and her Captain James... hang on, I've got that down here twice. Why have I got that down here twice on 2 days? So it was either April 9th or April 20th that they sighted it. And maybe it was just before midnight and just after. Apologies for that. Anyway, it's close enough on that, given that the 1770. 1836, but I will try and get that corrected and sorted out for next year.
Yeah, what day did they actually see?
Yes, sight the eastern coast. 1836, John Batman and his family arrive at Port Phillip in present-day Victoria and settle on Batman Hill. So he had a controversial treaty, in quotes, with the local Wurundjeri people aimed to purchase land, but it was later invalidated by the colonial government. And the arrival founded Melbourne and sparked rapid settlement. 1908, 44 people are killed and 400 injured after two trains collide at the Sunshine railway station at the junction of Ballarat and Bendigo railway lines. One of Australia's worst rail disasters, and there was signalling and safety issues there. 1954, on April the 20th, in the Petrov affair, Evdokia Petrova seeks political asylum after the plane carrying her back to the Soviet Union lands at Darwin with her escorts disarmed by Commonwealth police. And that was during the Cold War tensions in Australia. And it also followed her husband Vladimir's early defection. April 21st, 1861, on the Burke and Wills expedition, Burke, Wills and King returned to their base camp at Cooper Creek, having crossed the Australian continent from Melbourne to the Gulf of Carpentaria. But this is always such a kicker. Their return was tragic as the relief party for them had departed just hours earlier. So
I know.
Just one of those things.
Just,
It's missed it by that much.
There's a few of those instances where they just, like ships passing in a night, just missed each other by that much, and the rest is history. But how heartbreaking it would have been. But
especially for King. Yeah, because he was the only one that survived the expedition, and just getting back and
to find out,
God, and you'd be running through your head. Oh God, if I had only we hadn't sort of stopped for that. Or you can always play woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Of course, yeah.
1883, George Ernest Morrison arrives in Melbourne, Victoria, having walked 3,270 kilometres, just over 2,000 miles from Normanton in Queensland. He was known as Chinese Morrison for his later exploits in China, and that walk was just demonstrating his remarkable endurance. And,
Sorry, I thought you were going to be like, he did it protesting something or something like that. Nah, he just did it for fun. He just went for a walk.
And launched his career as an explorer and journalist.
Wow.
And then I don't know whether actually, I don't know much about the bloke at all. I should look into him a little bit more. So, I don't know, maybe he did that to highlight that, or maybe he thought this could be a good way to launch it. 1883. I wonder if he could have secretly been right from it was around that era, probably a little bit too early. 1970, the Hutt River Province, a 75 square kilometre, 29 square mile, property outside Northampton in Western Australia, declares its independence from Australia in response to new wheat productions, becoming Australia's first micronation. One of my favourites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's been formally dissolved.
Yeah,
so.
It has. But I think,
But it was fun.
Must have done a Two Ticks Town Talk on that. I'm sure.
I think you did. I think you did one.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago now.
Couple of years ago. Wow. Couple of years ago. 1976, a gang of 6 men steal between $6 and $12 million from the Victoria Club located in Queen Street, Melbourne, and the Great Bookie Robbery, as it became known, involved tunnelling into the club and remains unsolved with no arrests. April 22nd, 1788, Captain Arthur Phillip, first Governor of New South Wales, sets out to explore Sydney Harbour. 1857, the colony of South Australia achieves responsible government after the first session of the bicameral Parliament of South Australia is held. 1983, diplomat Valery Ivanov, the head of the Soviet embassy in Canberra, is expelled from Australia after allegedly trying to involve Australian Labor Party official David Combe in espionage. April 23, in 1788, a settlement is established at Parramatta, west of Sydney, New South Wales, second one in Australia, and it became an agricultural hub for the colony, and it's a big suburban centre now. 1873, English-born explorer William Goss takes off from Alice Springs on an expedition to Central Australia, and there he names Ayers Rock. They were the first European group to reach Uluru. And 1874, a couple of explorers in this one, must have been the right time of the year. Alfred Gibson disappears on Ernest Giles' second expedition to the deserts of Western Australia, resulting in the naming of the Gibson Desert. Which I think we did that in Two Ticks Town Talk as well, didn't we? Gibson Giles, yeah. Yep, yeah. I can't remember where the starting town was. And finally, in This Week in Australian History, 2005, so Joe Bioki Peterson, the peanut farmer, the longest-serving Premier of Queensland, dies at the age of 94 in Kingaroy. So he dominated Queensland politics for 19 years with conservative policies and development focus. His reign was marked by controversies. There's the Fitzgerald inquiry into corruption. He was a polarising figure in Australian politics, but I feel like we can, after all this time, not necessarily, if you don't want to raise a beer to him, at least have a chuckle into your beer or a head shake over one, because he was a larger-than-life character in Australian history.
And his wife used to make pumpkin scones. They were quite famous. So raise your favorite pumpkin scone for Flo Bjarke Peterson.
All right, that sounded. I almost forgot for a moment that I was doing the quiz. But here we go. That sound as we know it, with the pumpkin scone being dipped into the beer, which you would never do. Is last couple of weeks I did, or a couple of fortnights for me as we do it roundabout, we did on roadways, and this time I'm taking us to waterways as we visit some Aussie rivers. Ooh. Now, this one I reckon you'll probably get. What's the longest river in Australia?
Ooh. This one is got to be the... I'm going to go with the Murray. I'm just thinking... Yeah. Hang on. I was just like, it's either the Murray River or... I'm trying to think of that one in New South Wales. Is it the Murrumbidgee?
Oh, yeah.
I was like, nah, I don't think that's as long as the Murray River. Because I was like, this could be a trick question. I'll lock in the
this
Murray
one. This one was
River.
a straight thinking one. So yeah, I mean, the Murrumbidgee is a long one. Can't remember how long it was. Yeah. And God, I only did that. The other week from Float. That ends up joining the Murray, I think.
Oh, does it?
Actually, I'm going to reverse what I said just there. I'm not sure, but it is a long one. I'm just trying to think. Yeah. Anyway, that doesn't matter. That's not germane to this question. So yes, you're correct. Murray River, 2,508 kilometres, about 1,558 miles long. So it starts in the Australian Alps in New South Wales and forms much of the Victorian-New South Wales border. So when you look at the border and wonder why it's such a squiggly line, that's why. And then it goes into the Southern Ocean near Gayundah in South Australia. And then if you include tributaries like Culgoa, Balone and Condamine rivers, it creates a waterway around 2,740. So yeah, that's a decent river.
That wonderful algae bloom that's destroying all of the the marine life in the St. Vincent Gulf has the Murray River to thank for it.
Yeah, well, yeah. God, that's a really shocker. I'm sure we'll probably get another story on that later in the year, so keep your eyes out. Hopefully it's a positive one.
Fingers crossed.
Now, of course, after what's the longest, what's the shortest river in Australia? Oh. And I'll be impressed if you get this one. Like, really impressed.
I don't know, because this is where naming, like, the definition of a river is quite loose, actually, where one river starts and where one river ends. So I've just, on Google Maps, I've just followed the Murrumbidgee to the end, and you're right, it does join up into the Murray River. So the Murrumbidgee is a tributary to the Murray River. So then you go, well, which river is which? You know, where does they start, and blah blah blah. I have absolutely no idea. I feel like this is going to be...
I'll give you a massive hint. It's in Victoria. And it's not man-made completely, but it was a bit human assisted.
It's got to be. Yeah. It's got to be at a dam then, some dam that's been.
I'll give you even more. It's technically in Melbourne Metro.
Ah. What's the river in Melbourne called?
And it's not the Yarra.
It's not the Yarra River, so
no.
I don't know what. I don't know any other rivers.
Look, that's why I was comfortable. It's called the Paterson River, And officially it's
That was my second guess.
I should have left you get going. So officially it's just 5 to 6 kilometres long, and there's Patterson Lakes is a suburb that was created alongside with it. So it was actually it was artificially created in 1878, or part of it in 1878, as a drainage channel, and it flows into Port Phillip Bay near Carrum. But its upper part is mainly Dandenong Creek, and there's one other tributary which is 53 kilometres long. But the part that's classified as a river, because it's got defined banks, it's got a mouth that goes into the sea, it's got a certain amount of flow. That's because I looked up, what's the difference between a river and a creek? That's part of it.
My question.
Yeah. But because of that, it's classified as a river. So, so not a long one, but yeah. Now, this is a two-parter. I reckon you'll get one. I got faith on you to reason out potentially closely the second one. So the first part of this, what is the deadliest river in Australia?
Ooh, that's a good question. My first thoughts is it's going to be something that's moving much quicker than you think. So I know there's a river in the UK that's really, really dangerous, and kills almost everyone that swims in it, because it's not very wide, but it's really deep and has a really strong current, and the water's really, really cold. Okay. So my first thoughts go, maybe it's something in like Tasmania, because it's really cold water. But I can't imagine Tasmania has many very long rivers, and it's not super populated. So that's probably not the right way.
You're not right, but it's interesting reasoning.
So then my next thought would be it's probably in Victoria, just because of proximity to people. Like, people are going into the rivers, but maybe not, because do people really go into the Yarra River very often? I'm not sure.
You were right in thinking volume and length.
Yeah, so then I'm thinking probably the Murray is the biggest river in Australia. So by default, it's going to have the most people, interacting with it. So I'm going to lock in the Murray River just by point of, not that it's individually the most dangerous, just because it's the biggest, and so it's going to have the most interactions. Yeah,
exactly. So it's recorded the highest number of drownings. It's got strong currents and hidden snags and cold water, and also, given how picturesque a lot of it is, alcohol's also a common factor. But yeah, it's a big river, so it's got a higher chance of people drowning. But the second part of the question, what river is the deadliest per kilometre?
Ooh, see, that's kind of where my mind was at before.
Yeah, and we're actually reasoning it pretty well.
This is much more much more difficult to gauge, because I feel like, again, this is probably more of an obscure river. The question would be, is it an urban river, or is it more like a suburban river that there's a hidden danger, or is it a dangerous river because of what lives in there? Like, is it somewhere up north in far north Queensland because it's full of crocs, and the bloody every 3 months a crocodile rips someone apart? I don't know.
You've got three good reasonings in there, but it's the answer to this question is only one of them.
Is there's a river up near Darwin, isn't there? Is that, what's the one? What's that river crossing we were talking about recently in the that feels like it's
Carl's Crossing. River. Yeah.
That feels like it's got to be the most dangerous, river, surely. But how many people get attacked there? Because the danger is very obvious, right?
Yeah.
So you look at the danger and you go, nah. Which I feel like cold, fast water is what's much more dangerous because you don't.
It is urban. I'll give you that. And your reasoning was, I like where you're going with that reasoning because that was one of the things. It can be a deadly river, particularly when it's, there's floods and things rise and crocs get into some of those rivers up there in north. But in terms of a deadliest kilometre, that's not it, but it is urban.
I'm thinking then it's either the Parramatta River or the Brisbane River, just again by proximity to the amount of people that are there. And they're not particularly long rivers. So by virtue of the populations around them, the number of people that are accessing them and the short length, that might tip it over the edge. But put me out of my misery. What is it?
It's the Yarra.
Oh, it is the Yarra. Oh,
yeah.
Should have gone.
I know
you
sort of went and I thought you were about to seize on it, and then you went on off on another flight. So it's got one of the highest drowning rates per metre due to urban swimming, jumping, and hidden dangers. Wow. So deadliest per kilometre.
There you go.
Yeah.
Should have stuck with my guns. Kept in the cold weather of Melbourne.
Yep.
There you go. I can't say I've ever seen anyone swimming in the Yarra River, so that's why it didn't really come to my mind, but I guess people do. I don't spend a lot of time in Melbourne. It's too cold, so...
Well, look, I mean, I can't say it's something... It's not something that it's known for people, doing much swimming in there that I see. Like, it's not as if I sort of think, walking along the Yarra when I get a chance, and, there's a couple of people having a dip on a hot day.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. You need some sweet relief. It does get hot down in Melbourne. I've spent a couple of summers down there.
So what I mean was, it's not a common thing. I don't sort of feel like I'm walking along thinking, I'm seeing people doing that and thinking, that makes sense. Even on a hot day, you're not sort of seeing people, just half submerged in the banks on the side.
I think it's kind of a situation like, basically my reasoning for the Parramatta and Brisbane rivers, where it's not a particularly long river. There's a lot of people around. Even though you don't see it very often, there are still probably kids is probably a big one. And paying silly buggers, rope swings, all that kind of stuff. Hot days in Melbourne are particularly hot. It could be brutal in summer. So you throw that all in the mix. Yeah, that makes sense. So there you go. If you live in Melbourne, don't go swimming in the Yarra. Not just because you might drown, but also because, gross. It's not a particularly clean river. I wouldn't suggest you swim in any urban river here in Australia.
No, unfortunately.
On that note, thank you so much for joining us for another Australia Talks. If you have any feedback or suggestions for topics, please get in touch with us on our email at australiatalks@proton.me. We'd also be grateful if you could subscribe and give us an honest review, as this helps us out immensely. But the best thing you can do to support the show is share it with a friend that you think might enjoy it. Otherwise, join us next week for another episode of Australia Talks. As always, thanks for listening, and don't forget to tell your mum I love her.
Thank you, DK.